Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Report, actually the first episode of 2025. We're going to switch gears a little bit here today because of these devastating fires in the Los Angeles area. I'm very fortunate, recently reconnected with a friend of mine, played football with him at Stanford, but he's now got a business out there that's helping the victims of these fires, really to give them like a recovery roadmap to figure out how they're going to go out there and hopefully rebuild their home and their lives. So what's interesting, he actually is a victim of a fire himself. So I think he's got a very unique gift here to really connect with people from an empathetic standpoint. But also, Mike, we were just talking about kind of like a counseling standpoint as well. So Mike Urachko, the CEO and founder of Loti, which is plural for Lotus.
There you go. Exactly.
So, thanks. Hey, man, it's great to see you. I obviously wish we were reconnecting on different terms, and yet I'm also very grateful for what you're doing to support the people down here in LA. So let's just start with your story, what you've been through, and then how that became the inspiration behind what you're doing now to help these victims.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chris, for that platform too. I really appreciate it, man. We really just want to help as many folks as we can down there. And as we'll get into in a bit, we've got a ton of free resources, content, articles, terms, etc., to really help everybody. So, but the context to your point really starts kind of back in 2019. Just historically speaking, I'm a tech guy, tech designer type thing, and we were burned in October 2019 in the Kincaid fire. For us, it was a somewhat of a different kind of situation in that we weren't in town, and we were notified via Periscope. If you remember, that platform was like a live vlogging platform. And there was a vlogger following around firemen, and the first responders were at our house, and we actively watched them fight the fire at our house. It was crazy. It's like watching an action movie, but it's actually that's our house. That's really what's going on here. The first responders, they had to let most of the property burn. The main house was burned a bit, and then we had a ton of smoke damage. So that was sort of step one of the trauma. And then I went up there once, and then we came back, and on our way back up, a couple weeks later, I brought my wife with me. We got a call from the sheriff's office, and it turned out that we were vandalized and looted in the process as well. Just after they essentially had parked a moving van in the garage, and they not only were they taking personal property like furniture and housewares, but they were ripping out copper. They were pulling electrical fixtures and plumbing fixtures and all sorts of stuff there. And then for a couple of days. So basically we had all of a sudden it's deep into the pool of everything, right? It's obviously emotionally traumatic. This is obviously it's a family home. And then the complexities that ensued from rebuilding and recovering from all these things that are happening, right? You have obviously major fire damage. You've got smoke damage. You've got theft and looting and vandalism. And so for me, it set me off on a journey to really having to understand this process and understanding what insurance policies really even cover and how you even read them. They're really, really complicated, and they vary all over the place. And so really understanding that, and then quickly realizing through neighbors and friends that were also burned that there was a much bigger need, and a much bigger need for victims everywhere around how do you kind of get information into one place? How do you try to break this off into kind of edible bites? And that's what we've tried to do. And so we launched Loti, ironically, just a soft launch really on January 1st, 2nd. I mean, it's taken us a couple of years to put together the library. And then of course, LA happened, and here we are. And it's been a wild couple weeks. But just helping so many people calling in. But this is the site, loti.com. Loti is the plural for lotus flowers, and we really believe that every customer, every homeowner is a lotus. Lotus is a flower that blooms from muck, and believe me, our place looked like muck because it's just rubble and muck and water and whatever. And so that's what we believe, and so everybody's a lotus ready to bloom again. And so that's the context of Loti. This is the site. I'd encourage you to sort of, there's some information here from a corporate perspective, but really most of the folks we want to reach, just go ahead and click the learn side that up there on the upper right hand side. And this is the learning hub. And we've designed this to be really the largest sort of collection of resources on the planet. Like, it has a number of dozens of downloadable documents. You just kind of click and you'll find different documents, things like a lease in California. What does that look like? What does a general contractor's bid look like? What are those types of things? There are hundreds and hundreds of articles, those rally backs. There's thousands of glossary terms. So that those rally backs are basically the hundreds of articles that walk you through everything from stuff that's already happened, like before emergencies, before evacuations, how do you plan ahead, all the way through insurance, financing beyond insurance. How do you deal with contractors? How do you work with electricians, replacing personal property? And then finally, at the end, what we call Life 2.0, like how do you maintain your home? How do you harden your home? In California, what does defensible space mean from a fire standpoint? In other parts of the country, what does wet proofing and dry proofing mean from a flooding standpoint? So really just the whole gamut of home ownership and how do you protect what amounts to everybody's most precious investment. It's a need. Obviously, it's water, it's air, it's shelter. And so we are really helping folks with shelter and protecting themselves with their shelter. So that's what you've landed on right there. That's a quick roadmap for recovery. It's a one pager. It's our most popular thing right now, just simply because it kind of outlines what is a very complicated multi-year process and tries to give you a quick, like, hey, this is what to expect. We're not going to solve everything today.
So Mike, if you don't mind, just real quickly, I know it's hard for them probably to see these 13 steps, but to give people an idea, like step 1, safe evacuation, step 2, temporary housing, step 3, file your claim. And Mike, I want to get into this because I know you're acting as customer support right now with people that are going to this website, just so people know. Mike, maybe you want to tell me where that is, but there is an 800 number, I believe, that people can hear this. The 888-488 Loti.
Yep.
So when you're taking these calls, if you don't mind, share with us some of these stories that you're hearing so people can appreciate what people are going through and what we can do to support them. But also, I just got to imagine you're acting somewhat as a counselor, just because it's so devastating, right? These people have been through this traumatic situation where they're like, I don't know what to do. Insurance is complicated enough, let alone when you're in a traumatic state.
No, it's 100% right. I mean, community is really, really important. And I think the context of the calls in the first few days, a little bit different than the context of the calls in the last few days. Certainly one single thread that runs throughout is just scared fear, lack of empowerment, lack of like, what the hell am I supposed to do next? The first few calls were terrifying, really. Lots of crying. Obviously, it's a highly emotional moment. Like, what do I do? What do I do? Those moments are very much around, okay, let's make sure safety. I'd heard of a couple of hotels that were taking in folks. Like, get to some of these hotels. A lot of the hotels down there have been phenomenal in Santa Monica. So like, let's do that, right? Next thing is thinking ahead a bit. So when you have somebody thinking about housing, we were warning folks around what's called demand surge. And demand surge is kind of like, it's just a wave of stuff that happens throughout a whole recovery process. Right now in LA, there's a ton of stories around price gouging from long-term rentals. And so our advice early on, like immediately out of the gate, is let's get you a long-term place to stay. We had some connections and have them over at TPS, Temporary Placement Services. Airbnb had done some work with 211. Just some examples. Obviously, realtors down there have been overwhelmed, but basically trying to get ahead of this. Go ahead. Sorry.
What are you doing then, or what kind of connections do you have that are providing these long-term rental opportunities? Because everyone I'm talking to, like, hey, we're just scrambling. Do you have some sort of hub or contacts? Or
so so obviously those types of contacts are location specific. So we did plan ahead a bit. There's some folks on our team that have decades and decades of experience. So again, context, I'm a victim and a technology design type guy, right? I'm not a professional adjuster. I don't have an insurance brokerage license. I don't have a CPA. It's just like, I'm none of that. But we do have those types of folks that we lean on. And those types of folks actually do have those connections into things like TPS. and just basically almost like a hotline of like, hey, can you reserve some housing for us because we're going to have some folks coming in? Like those types of helpful moments. That moment, quite honestly, is probably past at this point. That surge is very, very real now. And the price gouging is very, very real. I have talked to some folks at Verbo as well of just trying to, do you have any houses available? Like, can we get anybody placed? That type of a thing before that gouging really happens. And so that's sort of like in that next kind of step. It's sort of temporary and long term. And then insurance is a big thing, obviously, right? So that is hopefully a lot of people don't have insurance, which is a different problem. A lot of people down there are underinsured in some way, shape, or form. There's a variety of reasons for that. It's not because they purchased the wrong policy. It's because the wrong policy, and we've had things like inflation. They didn't have the right endorsements on their policy to protect them from certain things. So there's a reason why a lot of people are underinsured. It is what it is. So we try to help them go through how to understand your policy. There's a bunch of articles on the site about this. There's even there's a fairy tale article that tries to humanize how to understand your coverage. And I can tell it in 90 seconds if you want.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it's the story of Bill the Friendly Giant. And so if you can envision Bill the Friendly Giant looking at your property from above, and then Bill basically takes your house in his hand and he rips it out of the ground. Everything that's left standing down below as your secondary structures, that's your coverage B. So things like fences, detached garages, sheds, pool equipment, stuff like that. That's your coverage B. He shakes it out over to the side. Everything that falls out, that's personal property. Stuff like couches and clothing and art and old Stanford football jerseys. All that stuff is down, on the ground, right? That's personal property. What he's got in his hand, that's A. That's your primary dwelling stuff. So everything that's permanently attached, like those plumbing fixtures, electrical fixtures, water heaters, things like that. And then, of course, you don't have a place to live like most people in the Palisades right now. That is then covered under D. And so D is basically loss of use. That's where that rental not income, but rental reimbursement comes from, and things of that nature come out of D. And so it's just a way to think about it, because when you actually open up your insurance policy, you have something called a declarations page. It's 2 or 3 pages. And it's just like written in hieroglyphics. They try to humanize it as a bit, but it's like, okay. And then the real thing, when you talk to your insurance company that first time and you file the claim, you want to ask for a certified policy jacket. And that's a big action, and trying to get that, because that has a lot of additional information in there. It's additional information around different endorsements you might have, being reimbursed for things like groceries and landscaping, and what the inflation arithmetic or math really is, the algebra, what that really is if you have inflation guard coverage. There's a bunch of stuff that sits in there that you'll want to get a handle on. If you can't read that, we have tons of information on the website in those articles. There's an article on every single endorsement we're aware of. There's an article about each coverage bucket. There's dozens and dozens of articles. So on just on insurance. So that's kind of the next step. Then there's this whole other process that happens over the next few years. Try not to get too overwhelmed with all that. Permitting, contractors, et cetera. That's coming. I'd say if, in the downtime of sitting in the hotel and going crazy and stress, to me, knowledge is power. It makes me feel better if I'm reading something and trying to understand a little bit more. I would just encourage folks to basically read those articles. If you want something to do, you can kind of work on some inventory while it's fresh in your mind. But that's kind of a next step kind of a thing. I'm trying to put that list together. So
again, I mentioned you're acting as customer support. If people want to call this number, again, it's 888-488-LOTI. I got to imagine there's been some stories that you've heard that really stand out to you. Share with us some of those stories.
Sure. Well, our very first call in was, she was in tears. I won't mention her name, but she's a wonderful woman, and they evacuated, and they lost everything. When during the process of evacuating, it was in the middle of the night, and she was able to grab her cat. But basically she saw the flames coming, and when she opened up the front door, she was blown over by just the pressure change from all the heat and smoke outside. She saw her neighbor's house was on fire, and so she was able to get out. Her husband was out of town, and obviously very traumatic. Obviously, I talked to her just a few hours after she was evacuated, and going through that, and then diving into the details. She has an autoimmune deficiency issue, and so she needs sort of special care with air filtering. And so smoke is just like, oh my God, this is like the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen, right? And ensuring we have HEPA filters and having the right coverage. And how can we look in the insurance coverage to see that you're covered for that kind of equipment moving forward, right? Like, how do we set that up in a long-term housing situation? So it's just it's hard, like in a call like that, where number one, you want to make sure people are safe, and number two, just trying to calm nerves that you're not alone. It's not okay, but like you're not alone. There are people around you in your own community that are there to help, that are going through the same process, the same trauma. And then there are other folks like myself that have recovered from this, and we recover stronger after this. You're going to learn a ton. You're going to build closer networks with your community. I mean, I'm much closer with my neighbors where we were burned, and we've come together in a variety of different ways. And so it's just it's a horrible time, but you try to help them through that and become that shoulder to lean on. So that's early on. More recently, I'd say calls are a little bit closer to around frustration and anger. Because understanding, it's like, oh, either I'm underinsured, or FEMA, I haven't had a change, like I can't get to FEMA, or where's the Red Cross Center, or I'm whatever, where there's 8 of us in a hotel or room or whatever, like, and those are more frustration and anger. There's not tears anymore, and there's not fear of fear of what's happening and the fire itself, but it's fear around moving forward and where am I going to live, and I've got 3 kids and the school's burned down, and clothing, where do I get that? And you want me to go shopping? Like, what are you talking about? And it's just like, yeah, I kind of do want you to go shop. Like, you kind of need to get some clothes for the kids. Stuff is not going to be back to normal anytime soon, but you kind of want to get some, you want to get some stuff here. Red Cross can help with clothing. Red Cross can help with food. Obviously there's money over there too. So there are organizations out there that are there to help people. And so you just try to get through the anger and frustration. And again, knowledge is power, and sharing, and here's more ways to help you forward. It's more funding ideas, more sources, that kind of a thing. So that's the general conversation.
I'm assuming you've had a couple angry phone calls as well. You mentioned to me yesterday, a guy's like, yeah, then they handed me $700. I'm like, what do you want me to do with $700? Right. So
yeah, I mean, if FEMA ever sees this, it's just, the FEMA's, they're overwhelmed too, right? And the folks that work at FEMA really try. They're not, which insurance companies and FEMA, everybody there's frustrations everywhere. People get a bad name, and it really isn't fair. The folks that work for FEMA, even folks that work for insurance companies that are field adjusters on the ground, those are good people. They got into these businesses to try to help people, and the situations become overwhelming for everybody. That demand surge that we talked about from a housing standpoint, it's going to roll through everything. It rolls through who's going to answer the phone at insurance, how many people are at Red Cross, who's going to answer the phone at FEMA, how many people are in the town permitting and planning commission that can actually issue you permits, where is the contractor going to get labor? I mean, this is a wave that goes through this entire process, right? And so the frustration on that story with FEMA was just like, this guy went to FEMA for help. It's like, hey, this is our federal government. And sure, well, here's a gift card for $775 and we'll get back to you. And it's kind of like, FEMA, can we work on that messaging just a little bit? Like, we understand that you're overwhelmed. Like, I get it. Like, well, not everybody gets it, but a lot of people get it. And it's just like, man, can you just, this is just the start. We're here to help you. Like, I mean, hell, like, here's information, have some stuff available. We've got, we also have books on Amazon. It's like, can you can you give some information to some folks just to help them? Like, those books are worth more than $700 for people on the ground. It's like, just help them for the love of God. They need information. $700 is great, but come on, they lost a house. Like,
which again, though, I think puts you in such a unique position, because the empathy that you can have with these people just transforms the conversation. As you're suggesting too, it just gives them a sense of like, okay, I'm alive. I'm going to get through this. It's going to be okay. The thing that I'm curious about is that you're a brilliant man. I can't imagine you know everything about everything. And so when I call this 888 number and I'm like, hey, I've got this issue with FEMA or my insurance, are you giving me some counseling and then giving me other resources, or how are you going about helping me?
Yeah, I do the best I can in terms of helping folks with what I know, right? So even just right before we got on the call, so I was a little late in that. I just had a call that came in, and he was only sort of partially burned, or it wasn't really even burned necessarily, but his neighborhood was burned. His house is okay. But then I tried to counsel him a bit on just smoke damage. It's like, yeah, I know your house didn't burn. Like, that's great. And he was very informed individual and understood insurance. And I was like, yeah, but just because, like, your house is smelling like an ashtray, and you want to make sure that not only is the inside clean, but I told him, like, do me a favor. Can you go up into the attic? Because your attic has vents, and then that soot and ash can get in and settle into your insulation, and that insulation might need to be remediated because it might not be safe for other folks to come into your house. So it's even for folks that don't think they have any damage or partially damaged. It's like, this is great, but let me at least try to help you with something like that, because it's just an area of stuff that I know. And then if it's out of my league, like, for instance, I don't know the ins and outs of FEMA, as an example, since we just talked about them. And so I would absolutely just direct them to, like, that field office or that Red Cross field office. There's a lot of great people that are involved on the ground to help. I look at us as like trying to provide a sort of this learning hub of, here's a backbone, a repository of information about this entire process, right? Where a lot of the press stories and a lot of, like, the folks on the ground are going to go away. And this process takes years. For me, it was 3.5 years. And there's no press coverage covering, like, on year 2, like, that just doesn't exist. Right. So this is a long rebuild. It's a long roadmap. And that's what we try to provide, is like all these markers along the way to just give you more information, more terms, more docs, whatever it is. So,
Mike, you just read my mind. And again, I think the beauty of, if you go to Loti.com, it's like they're holding your hand from step to step to step. The thing that I find, Mike, for most humans is that uncertainty just produces a lot of anxiety. And so, as you just mentioned, this is a long process. I think people right now are finally, many of them, getting their feet back on the ground and feeling like, okay, I'm alive. But as you know, now there's going to be this huge demand for lumber, for steel, for contractors. If you can, just to try to dissipate some of the anxiety, because walk us through what people can anticipate maybe over the next 12 to 24 months. So as they're going through this and they're bumping up against, hey, there's no more contractors, whatever that conversation might be, you've had a chance to educate them so they don't freak out maybe as much.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I mean, so the extreme, like, next steps, you're going to have FEMA is going to be sending you some information, because they're going to have to do debris removal, right? And debris removal in these neighborhoods, it's not just like get out a wheelbarrow, right? Or even a bulldozer. It's hazmat. There's very hazardous materials in there. So you don't want homeowners doing it on their own, even though legally they're kind of responsible for it. But FEMA is going to come in. They're going to give you a release form that allows them to get access to your property. And it's also going to give them access to, if you have a debris removal endorsement on your insurance, it'll give them access to that to basically pay for the cleanup. That said, then moving forward, I would, there's going to be a race for even start before contractors. I mean, you're going to need a contractor, of course, at some point. You're going to need an architect. You're going to need engineering resources. So there's LA itself. When we play this thing out a year from now, the labor resources in LA are going to be strained. Labor prices are going to go up. So I think advice to contractors down there when they're quoting things is, don't get yourself, upside down type of a thing where you want to make sure that your labor pool that you're leveraging is actually going to be stable, because contractors will steal they will steal pods of workers from other contractors. And you show up at the site one day and you've got 10, and the next day you've got 0, because that's actually what happened. People just get paid to move to another team and another crew, because you know what, this house is more. I do recommend, there are contractors that have experience rebuilding from fires. And so building a new home, all contractors, if they're licensed, they know how to do it. But actually interfacing with insurance companies, creating documentation for insurance companies. Also, as you go through that process, your bank is going to be involved. So like if you have a mortgage, because obviously a bank owns your house via a mortgage, or certainly a part of it, right? So they're going to be involved in stuff. They want to make sure that, at least through coverage A, that you're spending that money, whatever money you're getting out of insurance, it's going through that contractor. That contractor is building something, it's permitted, it's inspected, and that you have the ability to get that information back over to both your bank. Your insurance company doesn't necessarily care as much about permits, but your bank absolutely might. And so having that kind of process with contractors that have done it before is certainly something that you kind of want to keep an eye out. Like if you're interviewing a contractor, that's something to say, like, have you worked on something like this before? Are you guaranteeing my labor source? What are you doing about materials? So like materials, for instance, it's illegal to price gouge, right? So like for somebody like a Home Depot, they're not going to just jack up lumber prices. The problem is that the Home Depot shelves are going to be empty. So where are you actually going to get your lumber from? And so I think some contractors would be advised to, not now, but at some point when they have a better idea of how many customers they're going to have, is warehouses and gathering basic supplies, plywood, roofing, gutters, things that you're going to need. You don't have to stock custom tile, but like things of that nature, it's advisable. Or you're just going to wait, right? And one of the arts about general contracting is obviously the web of materials coming in, and your labor supply, and you subcontractor for your electrician and the tile guy, and they've got 10 other jobs too, and all of that it is an art. And so materials become a really big impact. And so I would encourage folks to try to think ahead on that, and think ahead on worst case. Also from a homeowner, don't think that this is just going to be, I can just build a house in 8 months. It's like, good luck. That's not happening. Because every step along the way is this going to be it's just going to be hard. Really, that demand surge that you're seeing from a long-term housing rental standpoint is you're going to have that same dynamic as you go through all these major things, like even getting a permit and a plan and an engineering and a structural guy and a roofer. It's just going to keep happening. So things to plan ahead. That's how I would think about planning ahead. We have tons of articles there's a whole massive book on construction to kind of help you through at least what to expect in some of those cases. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of stuff to unpack on that front, but no, we weren't there yet. But anyways, sorry.
Well, we'll have you back, because obviously, as you mentioned, this is not going to be over tomorrow. The media is going to go away, but to have you to continue to educate and talk about this and empower people, I think is going to be great. Where we're at right now, based on your experience and what you're hearing from phone calls, because you just gave out a lot of great information, what's the single most important thing you think people should know today?
I think that I would say long-term housing. You want to make sure you've got a place with long-term housing. That would be number one. And talk to your insurance company and get your certified copy of your insurance. And like start with that. With those, which is obviously like safety for the family. A lot of other stuff is going to come together. We've got questions around like schools, for instance, right? The schools you're going to find out you can't fix a school, right? The community is going to figure this out. Your government leaders are going to figure this out. You'll have a place for your kids to go to school whenever the hell it is. I don't know. But like that can be really distracting. Like the couple things you can do now, make sure you've got a place to live and start getting a handle on your insurance. And if you need help deciphering the hieroglyphics that are in your insurance coverage, just go to Loti. You'll be able to read through it, everything. That's where I would start. Just do that for now. Okay.
Just want to give you the last word. Anything else you want to add or share that we haven't talked about?
No, man. I want to thank you actually for using your platform to just get the word out to folks, Again, all this content is free. It's hundreds of articles. There's thousands of glossary terms. There's downloadable documents to kind of say like what a contractor bid looks like or whatever you might need. There's a sample lease from California in there too for long-term housing. So just spread and so victims talking to fellow victims or whatever. We just want this content in everybody's hands from one victim to another. Please, it's here to help you. Feel free to call the number, ask me additional questions or other folks on the team, and we'll try to get back to you as best we can and connect you with whomever we can. That's
Mike. Again, thank you for what you're doing. Wish we were getting back together on different circumstances. But again, if you're somebody out there that you need help, you know someone that needs help, you can go to loti.com. You can see the number here scrolling across the bottom, 888-488-LOTI. You can talk to Mike directly. And as you can see, very knowledgeable about the situation. He's been through this. He'll be able to give you some guidance, hold your hand, and then direct you into the right places to go. So, Mike, keep up the great work. If there's anything else that you think of, please let us know so we can let, obviously, everyone else aware of that. And just want to say thank you all for being here on the Commercial Real Estate Report. To all the victims out there, we're praying for you. Thoughts and condolences. We will get through this. LA strong. There is going to be another side. I know it's challenging, but I think it's going to bring us together, and we're going to come out on the other side okay.
100%.